Greetings, everyone, from the holy apple, holy hilltop, holy land. We are on the 6th day of the month of Av, 5779. Today's class, you only have to put on a couple of seat belts because we give a guarantee. The wildest information you've never heard about the 9th of Av, guaranteed. So put on a couple of seat belts, and we're really going to rock here. This class was not planned until yesterday, when I heard this information. I started investigating it, and I was totally mouth open, amazed at this following piece, how apropos it is. What an honor it is, a free present by God above, to be able to give this over. As I said, guaranteed. You've never heard such wild information. Okay. Took me about, after hearing this, to find it actually, it took me about an hour and a half, and that's calling various rabbis who were unable to find it for me. I gave them various details, they took it from there, they were not able to find it. So, this class, even though it's short, took a while to get down the information. So let me tell you where it is. We are in the book Torah Moshe. It's written by the Chatam Sofer, Rabbi Moshe Sofer. Page, the portion of the week, Dvarim, Deuteronomy, this week's portion, page 11, side B. Listen to these words, really amazing. The Chatam Sofer, the commentator, he gives us a play-by-play, detailed dates of what exactly happened in the 9 days or 10 days of the month of Av. He does not say where he received this information. There's a book. It's called the life, the history and life of the Chatam Sofer. There on page 148, the author of the book writes that this amazing information that we are privy to hear today must have been received. The Chatam Sofer, the rabbi, must have received it through divine inspiration, like a prophecy, short of a prophecy, because he doesn't say where he receives all these dates. As you'll see, he gives a day-by-day online occurrence, events as they occur. So let's take from the top. It's one day. It's the last day of the month of Tammuz, or we'll call it one day before the new month of Av. Jacob takes his two wives, Rachel and Leah, and they decide to, there must be 50 ways to leave the White House. Just drop off the key, Lee. Get off the bus, Gus. Yeah, there must be 50 ways to leave the White House. But it's not exactly the White House. It is the house of his father-in-law, whose name was Lavan, white. So as a joke, we call it the White House. After 20 years in the house of Lavan, being tricked 100 times, Jacob being tricked by his father 100 times, they had 100 different agreements, business agreements, that the father-in-law Lavan, even though it was called white, as in purity, he was the most impure person, deceiver on the entire planet. So after 20 years of taking this stuff, Jacob and his family and his kids, 11 kids, they decide to go back to the land of Israel. Okay, so that was one day before the first day of the new month of Av. We know it says in the Torah that Jacob was on the road again for 7 days. And on the 7th day, Lavan catches up. Does not speak with him, but he catches up to Yaakov and his family. Okay, so now, this was on the 6th day of Av. Got it? Lavan catches up with Jacob. At night, which is in the Jewish calendar, the date changes at night, as it says in Genesis, Vayi erev vayi boker. First there is evening, and then there is day. Whereas the Gentiles, the date changes at 12 a.m. Different. So, on the eve of the 7th of Av, God appears in Lavan's dream and tells him, listen, buddy, you better beware. Do not do anything to Jacob and his family. Don't speak good, don't speak bad, leave him alone. That was the night of the 7th. On the 7th day of Av itself, Jacob and Lavan cut a deal. They make a covenant between themselves. They pull out a stone and they bring in witnesses, and it becomes a testimony that the Jewish people, Jacob's descendants, are not allowed to go past this rock as a testimony. They are not allowed to touch the land of Aram. Lavan lived in a place called Aram. Today, it's near Syria. Northern Israel, it's near Syria, a little bit below Syria. It's called, in Hebrew, it's called Aram Tzova. So Jacob and Lavan cut an agreement, and that happened on, this covenant was signed, sealed and delivered on the 7th day of Av. Now, this stone, this testimonial stone, what was it called? And then, very interesting, the Torah gives us two names. It was called in Hebrew Gal Ed, and in a different language, we'll call it Aramite, from the word Aram, where Lavan lived, they spoke Aramite. That's why he's called Lavan, he's an Aramite. So, Lavan, Toda. So, all of a sudden, for the first time, there are two words in the Torah that are not from the Holy Tongue Hebrew. Listen to the words of the Khatam Sofer. That when Jacob brought into the Torah these two words that were spoken by Lavan, Jacob called this stone of testimony, called it by its Hebrew name, and Lavan called it by its Aramite name. When Jacob brought into the Torah, the Holy Torah, a foreign language, this was the beginning of the end. Why? Because in the words of the Khatam Sofer, Jacob brought in a husk of impurity into the Torah. And listen closely. This happened on the 7th day of Av. And we know that the Gentiles, the enemies of the Jewish people, in the time of the destruction of the temples, they entered the sanctuary, they entered the temple on the 7th day of Av, even though it was burnt eventually on the 9th and the 10th, but the entrance into the building, the beginning of the end, began on the 7th day. And this corresponds to Jacob allowing a foreign language, a foreign influence into a pure and holy Torah. Remember that. There's some kind of influence. Because languages, you know, they say various languages are romantic languages. When you hear it, it does something to you. And certain languages are very harsh. Does also something to your soul. So this was an influence, a foreign influence brought into our Holy Torah. Amazing. And because of allowing this foreign influence into the Torah, the Gentiles were allowed to enter the holy sanctuary of the temple due to this. Next day, Chatam Sofer keeps us in suspense. The 8th day of Av. Jacob wakes up and he sends messengers to his brother Esau, who he has not seen for 36 years. 36 years he hasn't seen. 14 years he hid in the seminary, in the yeshiva seminary of Shem and Aver. And then 22 years where Jacob was hiding out in the White House, the house of Lavan, where he married, had a family. And it says in the Torah, straight out, in Genesis 33, it says that Jacob was very, very frightened. Now, folks, this is unusual. Why in the world? Thank you. Why in the world would Jacob be frightened? Don't we remember just one portion before that? In the portion of Vayetze, God promises Jacob, don't be worried. I am with you. I will return you to the land of Israel. I will bring you back to the land of Israel. Thank you. So no sweat. Don't worry, as the sweatshirt says. Everything's cool. We're good. Why in the world is Jacob afraid? But not only is he afraid, he's frightened tremendously, terribly. Listen to the words of the Chatam Sofer, prophetic. Why was he afraid? He was afraid because of the fact that he had made a covenant with Lavan without asking permission from God. Got it? He was frightened. He now felt that because of the fact that he had made this covenant, he had made a mistake of making this covenant. We said, because of this covenant, this allowed the Gentiles to penetrate the most holiest place on the world, the Temple Mount. This covenant on the 7th day. So he's frightened now. Now he believes that he has no longer divine protection because of this covenant. It says in Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, the book, chapter 36, it says that Jacob made a covenant with the people of Aram, because Lavan said to Jacob, I know that the Jewish people will in the near future inherit my land. The original boundaries that were promised to Abraham, the land of the 10 nations. I know that the day will come soon where the Jewish people will inherit my land. And therefore, I want you to swear to me, Jacob, that you will not touch our land. And therefore, the words of the rabbis, our sages, go further. When King David wanted to capture and conquer the land of Aram Tzova, the territory that Lavan used to live hundreds of years previously, he was not able at the beginning to conquer the land because of the fact that Jacob had cut a covenant with Lavan. It was only after King David realized that there's a Jewish law that if one has a covenant and one side breaks the deal, one side does not keep their promises and their part of the bargain, then the deal's off. And King David realized that not once but already twice the Aramites, the Aramim, had already violated this covenant between Jacob and Lavan, and they had attacked the Jewish people. It happened in the time of Bilam, the Gentile prophet, and Balak, the king. It happened once again in the time of the prophets, during the days of Kushan Rishatayim. So you don't keep your side of the bargain, we're off the hook. That's the way it works. So Jacob is afraid, he's frightened here because of the fact that he cut a covenant with Lavan. This was able to delay, hundreds of years later, the conquest of King David. Next, on the 8th of Av, Jacob sends messengers to his brother, peace offerings to his brother. Jacob prepared himself in 3 different ways. He prepared himself with peace offerings. He prepared himself for war. And he prepared himself with prayer. That was the 8th. The night of the 9th of Av, the tragic date in Jewish history, when the spies came back with their report that we cannot go into the land of Israel. It was supposed to be a joyous day, the day that we received news that we're going into the land of Israel, the 9th of Av. The day that turned into a national tragedy dozens of times. The first expulsion of Jews in Europe by the English in 1290. The expulsion of the Jews of Spain in 1492. Crusades. First World War began on the 9th day of Av. And we all know that the Second World War was just a continuation of Germany declaring war on Russia. Just the continuation, even though some years had passed. So you could say the First and Second World War began on the 9th day of Av. The day that Gush Katif was destroyed was the 9th of Av, the Jewish communities, the 25 Jewish communities in the south of Israel, Gush Katif. So what happened at that night? That night, Jacob has a fight with the angel of Esav. And the angel of Esav at the beginning is not able to overcome Jacob. The evil angel of Esav is not able to overcome Jacob. However, in the end, as they say, it ain't over till the fat lady sings. In the last round, bottom of the 9th, 2 outs, 2 strikes on you. He was able to hit the ball out of the stadium. The angel of Esav was able to injure Jacob in his thigh. That means that the spiritual angel of Esav was able to find a weak spot in the soul of Jacob, which is represented in that area of the body. And that weak spot, that spiritual weak spot, which occurred on the 9th day, the evening of the 9th day of Av, would remain for the entire thousands of years of Jewish history. That weak link, 9th of Av, where did it begin? It began with Jacob fighting the archangel, the spiritual angel of Esav. And because of the fact that the angel was successful in a certain place to find a spiritual lacking, slight spiritual lacking in Jacob and Jacob's descendants, this gave power to evil spiritual forces to control the day of the 9th of Av. This gave the evil spiritual forces power to turn righteous people that were sent to check out the land of Israel and were expected to give a tremendous positive report. That impurity, that spiritual impurity that entered the Jewish people via the angel of Esav, that had power to change the report of righteous men to a negative report that it's suicidal to go into the land of Israel. And the population, the majority of the population, followed the majority of the spies, saying, it's time to return to Egypt. It's time to go back home. Back home ain't Israel. Back home is Egypt. That's at night. The 9th day of Av. What's on the itinerary, folks? Amazing, listen to this. On the 9th day of Av, the Khatam Sofer continues, was the time that Jacob bowed down to Esav 7 times. Thus, giving Esav, who, aka Rome, who destroyed the Second Temple, the exile that we are presently in, is the exile of Rome, Western civilization, Christianity. By bowing down 7 times to Esav, listen to the words, the frightening words of Midrash HaGadol in the portion of Vayishlach, chapter 33, verse 3. It says, it brings down the verse that Jacob bowed down to Esav 7 times. And because of the fact that Jacob bowed down 7 times to Esav, the Edomites, the descendants of Esav, the Gentiles, merited, quote unquote, to destroy 7 spiritual houses of the Jewish people. It starts with the tent of the meeting place, Ohel Moed, and it ended with the first and second temple. There are 7 destructions of our tabernacle, or of the Beit HaMikdash, of the Holy Temple. 7. Those are connected to the 7 bowing down. 7 times that Jacob bows down to Esau. And every time that he bowed down, it gave the Gentiles. Every time we bowed down and prostrated ourselves to the nations of the world, to Esau, who represents the nations of the world, they were able to destroy, they received power to destroy one of our holy sanctuaries. Our guarantee is good. Who's ever heard these words? Amazing words. We talk so much about Lashon Hara, making sure that our speech is the correct speech of a Jew. Important, of course. We speak about keeping of observance of Shabbat. Of course, they're all important. No one is belittled. But we don't hear this lesson. We never hear this lesson. Maybe it's about time. We look and we're 1,950 years after the destruction of the Second Temple, and we're still in this exile. We're still in this exile. So we better wake up, smell the coffee, face the music. Maybe it's worthwhile to think about other points. And this point is an amazing thing. We know that when Abraham made a covenant with Avimelech, the king of the Philistines, he brought in seven sheep. And our sages tell us in Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer and other places that because of the fact that Abraham made a covenant with Avimelech and he brought 7 sheep in order to perform the covenant ceremony, 7 holy sanctuaries of the Jewish people, similar to what we just read, were destroyed. So folks, it's a twofold deal here. On one hand, our sages teach us not to make covenants with the nations of the world. Nachmanides writes that the beginning of the downfall of the Jewish people in the time of the Second Temple was when the sons of the Maccabees cut a deal with the Roman Empire, a covenant. That was the end. How does it work? You make a peace agreement and you open yourselves up. We open ourselves up to the Gentile influence. We have an agreement. We have a pact. We have a covenant. We open up ourselves and welcome you in. And we talk and we sit down and we have discussions and we exchange ideas. This influences the Jewish people ideologically in a negative fashion. And then later on, this is the beginning. That opens up the door. Once we open up the door to foreign influences, to non-Jewish influences, then it has an impact on us And then the transgressions begin to roll. So when you look again this year in the Talmud or in other Jewish sources, and you look for all the sins, all the transgressions that brought upon the destruction of the temple, understand that what you're reading, when it says the Shabbat was desecrated, when it says we worshipped idols, when it says we participated in illicit relations, when it said that we murdered, this was a result. This was the result, the natural result of opening ourselves up to the nations of the world and allowing them to join us, allowing them to join forces with us, to come together with us. And then instead of separating ourselves from the nations of the world, and then later on, because of the fact that the Jewish people are separate, therefore, that's when they bring blessings to the nations of the world. The Talmud, the Yerushalmi Talmud tells us an amazing example, that when the Jewish people are alone, they are like a raisin. Ever see raisins? They look like these nothing little guys. You know, they're like really scrawny. But once you put them in water, they blow up. Which means that the first stage of the Jewish people, according to the Talmud of the Jerusalem Talmud, is that first the Jewish people stick to themselves. They're really scrawny. They're to themselves. But afterwards, they open up and they bring tremendous blessing. They make wines and all kinds of liqueurs from this. Grape juice. So it has its influence. First, we separate ourselves, but by our separating ourselves and keeping the foreign influences away from our minds, ideologies, our hearts, in the end, this is the most greatest blessing to all the nations of the world. If they understood that, they would say, you stay separated, segregated. So folks, an amazing thing. How tragic it is. How tragic it is that somebody said to me yesterday, all this class just happened yesterday. A person sent me a clip yesterday. It's called Vice on HBO. Documentary. This was from May 15th, 2018. So it's about 14, 15 months ago. This clip received over 2 million views so far. 2 million views. It is a must for Jews to see this clip, to understand Christian love. What does it stem from? Have they changed? Have they changed their face over the last 20, 30, 40 years? Or not? Watch that clip. It's why evangelic Christians love Israel. Why? And there they interview leading ministers today of the evangelic movement. One of them is Irvin Baxter. He's the head of the End Time Ministries. Listen to what it says. Listen to his words and remember them. He says the following. As he's parading around with his group on the Temple Mount, he's explaining to his group that you understand that very soon 2/3 of the Jewish people will die. Thank you, Irvin. 2/3 of the Jewish people will die. Not the world, the Jews. And then there's 1/3 left. He's basing. His words are taken out of context from Zechariah. And then he explains that what Zechariah says, that 1/3 will be brought through the fire, what does that mean? That these 1/3 of the Jewish people that are left, they will all of a sudden have 2,000 years of blindness to the true Messiah, JC. 2,000 years of a blindfold on the Jews' eyes, stubbornness, haughtiness in his words. They will realize that the true Messiah is JC. And then Minister Irvin Baxter goes on to tell us that at that moment, when JC appears on the Temple Mount, 2/3 of the Jews have been killed out. We have 1/3 left of the Jews. We will convert them by the hundreds of thousands. You heard those words. Check it out. We will convert them, Jews, by the hundreds of thousands. Folks, do we understand how many Jews are on the take? How many rabbis are on the take? When I say on the take, go around Israel. Go all over, go over settlements, and you'll see signs. Christian Friends, they have all kinds of funky names for their organizations. They're all on the take. From people, from Christians, that their goal today, they smile at the Jewish people. And in order for them to reach the day, that holy final day where JC will appear, they need us now to come and control the Holy Land in order to be slaughtered spiritually. And we have lowlives that have no problem accepting this bribe money, this black, dirty, filthy, muddy money. And they build sports centers, and they build cultural centers, and the name in the Holy Land, the name of the Christians flies high. 40% of American tourism to Israel is from these types of lowlives. These friends of Israel, friends like that, you sure don't need enemies. Can you believe how a person with any self-respect, I hate to say it, but when Gentiles say evil things about Jews and money, unfortunately, there are certain Jews that fall under this category. They know damn well they are not suckers. They're not idiots. They know the game plan. They know the end plan. They know the ideology of these Christians, and they're willing to smile with them. They're willing to hug them. For the money, they're willing to... 3 dots. We'll leave it at that. Do we understand what the Khatam Sofer told us? Khatam Sofer said that 2 words, 2 foreign words, were brought into the Torah. And this foreign influence of 2 words, not money, not Christians that are waiting for the day to spiritually slaughter the Jewish people, and not waiting for the day that 2/3 of the Jews, not spiritually, physically will be slaughtered. Waiting for that big day. Oh, I do believe. Amen. I do believe. 2 words brought in a foreign influence in the Torah. And that allowed the Gentiles to destroy the temple. It all happened on the 7th. That was the beginning of the end. 2 words. What are we going to say with the hugs and the kisses and inviting and writing letters, corresponding with Christian children, Jews and Christians corresponding, kissing each other, banquets, sitting together, drinking together, eating together. What is that doing to the Jewish Torah? What is that doing to the Jewish soul? This is the greatest destruction. So for right now, let's shove the Lashon Hara. It's important, but right now, let's shove it. And let's get down to the real. Let's get down to what is new. Evil speech, we have to correct it, but it's been going on, unfortunately, for all these years. This is relatively a new phenomena, that the Jewish people are stupid enough, or some of them, because of money, because of funding, they're willing to play along as they allow these missionaries to pour in to the holy, the friends. We won't call them missionaries. So it's time that we looked in the mirror and thought about these foreign influences that have been allowed, have been encouraged by rabbis and others, have been encouraged to be brought into Jewish communities, into the land of Israel, into the settlements of Israel. And let's get really to work, and let's really build the third temple.